It's time once again to compare two interesting books that appear to contradict with each other. Now, in previous episodes, we've compared The Lean Startup by Eric Ries versus 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, as well as The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss versus Crush It by Gary Vaynerchuk. This time around, we're going to take a look at Influence by Dr. Robert Cialdini versus The Language of Trust by Michael Maslansky. Now, for those of you who may own a copy of Influence, this is the brand new revised and expanded edition, so it might look quite different than the copy you have at home, but for the most part, it's going to be the same basic content. So let's begin by setting the stage by taking a look at the general theme of each one of these books. When it comes to Influence, the psychology of persuasion, this book has become a cult classic amongst marketers and salespeople. Now, to be fair to the author, the original intent behind this book was to help the average consumer understand the manipulative and persuasive techniques that many salespeople were using at the time. So the author actually comes at it from the perspective of how to avoid being influenced by the various techniques that are covered in the book. But of course, knowing salespeople and marketers, they latched onto the book and it's become sort of a manual for how to persuade and influence and even in some cases manipulate people more effectively. Now, when it comes to The Language of Trust by Michael Maslansky, this book is all about the value of building trust and credibility with people. It explains why your brand is arguably the single most valuable asset that you can build in business, whether it's your personal brand or your business's brand. As people become more and more skeptical today, it becomes increasingly important to focus on building a brand that customers can trust, because if they trust your brand, then of course they're much more likely to buy from you, and just generally speaking, it's a much easier decision for them to buy from you because they know you have skin in the game. They know you have something to lose. You have a reputation worth saving. So this book is all about the importance of building a brand over the long term. So the short version is that influence is used by people typically for persuasion and even manipulation, whereas the language of trust is about trust and credibility. Now, not to spoil the two previous comparison videos, but this is the very first comparison where I do truly believe that the ideas in these books do contradict with each other, at least as far as how people tend to use the ideas from a book like Influence, even in spite of the fact that the author had a different intention. When it comes to influence, the way that I see these ideas being applied, generally speaking, in the world is for a more short-sighted approach to business, where it's all about closing the sale, and the idea of building a long-term relationship with customers isn't seen as being as important. So for example, if you're selling used cars, or if you're in door-to-door sales, or if you're in any other scenario where you're not really trying to build a long-term relationship, then it can be very tempting to gravitate towards these kinds of ideas because they can end up manipulating people to engage in business where they might not normally engage in business. Now, that may or may not be a good thing, but that's kind of where I see these principles used in general. There are exceptions, and we'll come back to that in a minute, but typically, this kind of approach to business is often sacrificing the long-term game. Now, on the other hand, a book like The Language of Trust by Michael Maslansky is all about the long game. It's about building your personal brand or your business brand in a way that actually adds value for customers over time, because when a customer interacts with a brand they know they can trust, it's easier to buy from them, they have greater confidence, and they're not worried as much when it comes to potential issues down the road. So for example, let's say you were trying to buy a great TV. Well, if you buy from a trusted brand like Sony or Samsung or LG, naturally you're willing to pay a slight premium because you understand they have something to lose. They have a brand worth upholding. And if you have an issue with the TV over the next 6, 12, maybe even 18 months, well, you're far more likely to get service and support from a company that has a trusted brand. Whereas a no-name brand TV, if it has any issues in the future, you almost certainly won't get the high level of service and support because they have less to lose and they might not even be in business in 6 to 12 months. So this is the power of a brand, and over time it becomes more and more valuable. So generally what I find is entrepreneurs often start kind of on the influence side of the equation, where it's all about closing the sale, it's all about getting their business up and running, whatever it takes to generate a profit. And then over time, they typically migrate towards more of a language of trust approach, where they understand the value of building a brand and they actually want to build a legacy. And they understand that for customers, this actually creates additional value and makes it easier for those customers to buy from them. Now, it's worth noting that since the original publication of Influence, Dr. Robert Cialdini has followed up with additional books in which he talks about the many downsides of abusing the persuasion and manipulation techniques that were covered in the book. So recognizing that salespeople and marketers were misusing the information, he talks a lot about the many downsides of doing so, including the fact that when you engage in that kind of behavior, you risk creating a culture of questionable morals and ethics. And of course, there are many ways in which this can come back to hurt the company and its future success. Now, with all of that said, it's still very important to go through a book like Influence to have a basic understanding of human psychology and how it might impact your business. Because even if you have no intention of manipulating or persuading customers in an unethical way, it's still very important to understand how your actions and how your business impacts customers and how they might end up making decisions based on incorrect actions. So even if you're not trying to manipulate people, you could accidentally make moves that actually hurt your credibility or make it less likely that customers will interact with your business. For example, a concept like social proof. Let's say that you're opening a brand new restaurant, and on the very first day of opening, your parking lot is completely empty. Well, that sends a signal to other potential customers because, generally speaking, when people don't know what to do or are uncertain about the action they should take, they look to the behaviors of other people. They want to see social proof that demonstrates that a behavior is the right action to take. So when they drive past your restaurant and they see an empty parking lot, they assume that other people must know something that they don't, and that there must be a reason why other people aren't attending that particular restaurant. And as a result, their shortcut leads them to believe that that must not be a great restaurant because other people don't think it's a great restaurant. And this can become a self-fulfilling prophecy in that everybody just believes that everyone else already knows it's a bad restaurant, and you create this negative momentum in the minds of potential customers. Whereas you have an opportunity to do the exact opposite, and without necessarily manipulating people. For example, some people might set out to ask their friends and family members to park their cars in the parking lot of the restaurant to simulate social proof. Instead, the takeaway here should be to make sure that right from the beginning of your restaurant, you launch with a promotion, with a marketing campaign. You make sure that you build positive momentum right from day one, that you have a full parking lot. That way, it's far more likely that people driving by will be interested in your restaurant and will either stop by themselves or plan to stop by at a future date. Now, another great example is the principle of scarcity. And the idea here is that people are far more likely to buy your products and services when they believe that their availability is limited in some way. And this really comes down to a sense of personal control. When somebody goes to buy a product or service and sees that only a handful are available and in stock, well, they want to maintain control. They don't want to come back the next day only to find out that they no longer have the option to buy the product because it would be sold out. So when there's limited availability, they want to grab that product immediately to control their ability to buy or to not buy. And so it actually encourages people to buy. And this, of course, is a very, very common tactic in all kinds of retail stores and online stores. And I'm embarrassed to say that I've abused this tactic where you pretend a product or service is more scarce than it really is in order to encourage people to buy. Now, a better solution, instead of faking scarcity, is to create products and services that are genuinely scarce. So for example, Lululemon famously cycles through different colors and different designs to make sure that their products and services are truly scarce. If you're interested in a particular shirt with a particular color, well, that shirt might simply be out of fashion or out of stock in a few short months. Likewise, if you're creating online video training courses where all of the content is completely pre-recorded and could potentially serve an unlimited number of students, well, for a limited time, you could add additional value by creating one-on-one question and answer sessions for students, where if they join during a specific period, they have the opportunity to talk one-on-one with a teacher to get answers to their questions. And this, of course, adds a human element, which is always nice, and it creates genuine scarcity because people intuitively understand that having a teacher's time is valuable and that time is limited, and so this is only available to a certain number of students before it becomes unsustainable. So, in summary, you want to understand the basic principles covered in a book like Influence. You want to look for positive applications for those ideas, and you want to avoid manipulating people or persuading people in an unethical way. That way, you can benefit from the many ideas from a book like The Language of Trust, where you're building a long-term brand around trust, credibility, and reputation. Anyway, those are my thoughts when it comes to comparing these two great books. If you have a different opinion or anything else to add into the conversation, let me know down in the comment section. And if you have two other books that you think would be interesting to see discussed here, let me know the names of them in the comment section. And be sure to subscribe and visit rickkettner.com. That's where you can go to discover the very best books for entrepreneurs.